Hey there, before we get started, I just wanted to let you know about an upcoming Crosscut event that I think you might be interested in. On April 29th, Michael Barbaro, host of The Daily, that wildly popular podcast from the New York Times, will be keynote speaker at the Headliners Gala, the live in-person event that kicks off this year's Crosscut Ideas Festival in Seattle. The gala, in case you're wondering, benefits KCTS9 and Crosscut. Learn more and get tickets at crosscut.com/gala. This is Crosscut Reports. I'm Sara Bernard. Today, we take a look at how one Native nation in the Puget Sound region has been getting its ancestral land back and building affordable housing for its citizens. Crosscut Indigenous Affairs reporter Luna Reyna found that the Suquamish Tribe is using new federal funding to help make sure that its own members can again live in community on their own reservation. The fact that for many years the Suquamish Tribe and its citizens own less than half of the land on the reservation, and that some members struggled to afford housing there, is based in large part on forced federal assimilation policies in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. It's also because of what the 21st century U.S. government has called broken promises. But now, between new funding, new efforts, and some new acknowledgement of the past, the Suquamish, along with other Native nations, are beginning to bring their people home. So, Luna, you've recently been doing a lot of deep reporting on the issue of housing on tribal land, and specifically the work that the Suquamish have been doing, both to reacquire tribal land and also to develop affordable housing for tribal citizens. And first off, I was just curious, how did you kind of get started on this reporting? How did you first hear about these efforts?
Sure. So I suppose for me, it hasn't been a secret that housing is a major barrier in Indian country. But specifically for the Suquamish, I received a press release from the tribe about the American Rescue Plan relief funds that they'd received, ARPA money, and that they planned on using it to house their citizens. My name is Luna Reyna. I am an enrolled Little Shell Ojibwe. My grandfather was Little Shell Chippewa tribal member, and so was my mom and aunties and uncles. At Crosscut, I center the experiences, voices, and work of both urban and rural Indigenous people from both federally recognized and unrecognized Native nations all over Washington state.
And briefly, as just kind of an overview, what kind of housing support are the Suquamish working on right now?
So they're doing a lot, actually. They provide mortgage subsidies, subsidized rental houses, rent-to-own homes. They have a repair and maintenance program. They've also built some small studio homes and some tiny homes. And they even provide financial counseling classes in order to help citizens better qualify for a home loan so that they can get into housing.
And is all of that funding coming from new federal funding, or is it kind of a combination of things? Do you know?
Oh, it's definitely a combination. These are programs that the nation has had going on, and so this sort of helped propel programs that they already had planned. They're allocating about $15 million from the American Rescue Plan to expand housing for their citizens and programs that they already had planned.
Mm-hmm. As you've reported, housing insecurity really disproportionately affects Native communities in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, what has your reporting shown?
I mean, if we're looking just at the numbers, over 500,000 Native households experienced severe housing needs, which is defined as living in conditions that are overcrowded, substandard, or cost-burdened. And 8% of Native households are considered overcrowded compared to 3% for the nation as a whole. You know, HUD research also revealed that Native American households with incomplete kitchen facilities is 7 times greater than the national rate. You know, and 70% of the homes in Indian country were in need of upgrades and repairs, most of them very extensive. You know, so there's It's a broad range of housing needs.
Right. It's like housing affordability, as in, for example, perhaps being able to afford rent or mortgage payments or something like that, but also in terms of housing in need of upgrades and repairs.
Right, adequate housing.
You know, these numbers, they don't come out of nowhere. You've surfaced, for example, some national reports created by the U.S. government that basically acknowledge the role that the U.S. government itself has played in creating some of the circumstances that Native communities find themselves in. For example, a report by the United States Commission on Civil Rights says, you quote, "The failure of the federal government to adequately address the well-being of Native Americans over the last 2 centuries." It's not only acknowledging that these are problems, but that these are problems based on failed commitments, quite frankly, broken promises. The name of the report is Broken Promises. I wonder if you could talk about that report a little bit as it relates to housing.
When the United States government displaced Native people from our homelands and our people and made practicing our culture and our ceremonies a federal crime, housing programs were an agreed-upon treaty obligation of the federal government with each sovereign Native nation. So that treaty obligation has remained unfulfilled for the Suquamish and all across Indian country.
I rise today to highlight the tragic shortage of suitable housing on tribal lands and to call for increasing funding for the highly successful Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act.
In an effort to simplify the tribal housing development process, the Native American Housing Assistance and Self-Determination Act of 96 was created. So it eliminated all the separate housing assistance programs that served Native American people and replaced them with the Indian Housing Block Grant. And tribes across the country in the 1990s got around $600 million to carry out their housing programs. That would be over $1.1 billion to each nation today. So tribes are actually operating with less money today than they were in the 90s to carry out housing programs. The Broken Promises report revealed the ongoing failure to fund this block program, and it just has consistently eroded the number of affordable housing developments each year. The Broken Promises report, this quote I think stands out really prominently. It says, "The United States expects all nations to live up to their treaty obligations. It should live up to its own."
In terms of treaty obligations in specific, as they specifically apply to the Suquamish, can you talk a little bit about the Treaty of Point Elliott and what that did and kind of what happened after that?
So the Suquamish were only one of more than 20 Native nations that were part of the Treaty of Point Elliott.
So in 1855, the Suquamish signed the Treaty of Point Elliott, and we signed that at Mukilteo with a number of other tribes from the northern and central Sound, and Chief Seattle signed for us.
So the Suquamish gave up the title to their lands, which was most of what's now Kitsap County.
In exchange for us signing out the title of our land over, we agreed to move to a reservation. A reservation was provided for us, and also our treaty rights were reserved.
In exchange for the ceded lands, the federal government agreed to provide education, Medicare, housing, land rights, and fishing and hunting. And in negotiations for the treaty, Governor Stevens, he said, I quote, "We want to give you houses and have homes so you'll have the means to cultivate the soil."
In 1887, well-meaning reforms...
And then the General Allotment Act, or the Dawes Act, was passed in an effort to sort of end traditional communal ways of living and further goals of assimilation by the U.S. federal government. And that way they could claim more land for white settlers.
It provided for each head of an Indian family to be given 160 acres of farmland, or 320 of grazing land. Then, all the remaining tribal lands were to be declared surplus and opened up for whites.
And so families were expected to move out to allotted lands to become farmers, which as community people for thousands of years who don't see land or people as things to be conquered, and who knew just how abundant their lands were without farming it in a way that their oppressor preferred. This didn't really work the way the government had hoped. So when people refused to move to their allotments and under pressure from angry settlers, the federal government seized they called surplus lands. Now, with the Suquamish, there wasn't much surplus lands, so that's when, Indian agents came in and sort of seized lands in that way.
Yeah, for those who aren't familiar, who were these Indian agents? What were they doing? What was that role?
Once each nation was placed into their individual reservations, these people called Indian agents, basically a civilian authorized by the president who acted pretty much as an ambassador between the nation and the federal government. They really took advantage of that role in order to, in essence, steal what they could from individual Native citizens. For the Suquamish specifically, many families were deemed, quote unquote, incompetent for things like not being able to speak or read or write English. This is a foreign language to them, and their lands were auctioned off. So Indian agents, they were just granted, sweeping power to oversee, the distribution of rations at the time, manage tribal property and their finances. If a landowner was deemed incompetent, the agent would take guardianship over the land, and it could be sold at auction. And sometimes this happened without the knowledge of the landowner.
Wow. In terms of an example of what happened, to one person and her family, you spoke with Angie Harrington, who works at the Suquamish Museum. And she has documents about what happened to her great-great-great-grandfather. Can you tell me about that, her experience, her family's experience?
Yeah, I'm really grateful that she sat and chatted with me and shared a bit about what her family has experienced. Yeah, her great-great-great-grandfather, Chief William Rogers, he was born at a Duwamish village in what's now known as Renton. He moved from his traditional home on Black River to his land allotment on the Port Madison Reservation in 1902, after Duwamish longhouses in Renton were burned repeatedly by settlers. So in 1910, the Indian agent of that area petitioned for the sale of Rogers' land. But in order to seize that land and sell the allotted land, every family member had to be found incompetent. So the petition that Angie shared with me showed that the Indian agent alleged that her great-great-great-grandfather was addicted to alcohol and that his wife was incompetent because apparently she was unable to perform manual labor. She was only 49. And their daughter, Alice, who was just 18, she was also supposedly incompetent due to addiction to alcohol. And their son was incompetent at just 25 for being, quote, irresponsible, intemperate, and being obliged to remain at home to help his parents, and is unable to find steady employment. And you can hear the drunken Indian stereotype being perpetuated in these old documents. So now, multi-million-dollar homes run along what's the street. This is called Northeast William Rogers Road, which is named after Angie's ancestor. So the Suquamish Tribal Chairman, Lawrence Webster, her great-great-grandfather, attempted to file a claim for violation of property interests, but they missed an arbitrary deadline by just 2 months, and so, yeah, it ended there, really.
I feel like something that really sticks out to me from your reporting is just that one result of these practices is that the Suquamish Nation and its citizens have therefore owned a percentage, to this day, only of their own reservation. You report at a low point, the Suquamish Nation and its citizens only owned about 30% of their own reservation. in many ways, this process to kind of reacquire land, it seems has been a long process for the nation. I mean, it really has been, it seems like over decades. I wonder if you could talk about that, like some of the land back efforts that you've reported on.
Yeah.
In recent years, a growing movement to reclaim what was once theirs has begun to form around the slogan, Land Back.
As awareness and relationships between the Suquamish Nation and local government sort of grow, there's been opportunities for returning land back. Commissioner Robert Gelder is actually, I chatted with him, and he told me that he's working with the Suquamish to transfer certain county-owned parcels of land and public right-of-way land within the reservation boundaries back to its original stewards. He wanted to do what he could, all that he could, to sort of shift and transfer whatever land he could back to Suquamish ownership. And there's also been a non-native Port Madison resident who's asked to remain anonymous, who's offered her deed her land to the Suquamish Tribe when she passes. And other people have come to the Suquamish before they sell their land on the market so that they have the first opportunity to buy it back. So there's a growing movement that, the chairman said that he hopes will continue. And there's even another group of non-native Indianola citizens who call themselves the Indianola Good Neighbors. And they definitely advocate within Indianola to repatriate a land back to Suquamish as well.
And in terms of housing, too, so there's this dual effort happening as sort of reacquiring land and also developing new housing projects and housing opportunities. What are a couple of specific developments getting built right now on the Port Madison Reservation?
In 2018, 36 acres of waterfront land was returned to Suquamish control. And so now that the nation is utilizing this land specifically for housing and community building with the support of the ARPA money, the relief fund money, they're building 22 to 4 bedroom townhomes called the Enitai townhomes. And so this will include some common areas, picnic tables, benches for community gatherings. The waterfront is incredibly culturally important to Suquamish. Their name comes from the traditional Lushootseed phrase, people of the clear salt water. As fishermen, canoe builders, basket weavers, the proximity of the townhomes to the water is incredibly meaningful. But now that, they have this land back, it's also close to, the Suquamish Museum, the House of Awakened Culture, which is the Suquamish Longhouse and Community Center. And there's actual open waterfront for Suquamish citizens to enjoy, that they haven't really had access to for a really long time. Communal growth is a part of reclaiming the land in community with other Suquamish citizens. That hasn't really been possible until now. And less than 2 miles from the townhomes is the Snooker neighborhood development, which is financed in part through over $2 million in ARPA funds. The Suquamish Tribe bought a dozen lots off of Totten Road and are putting in the infrastructure, including roads, water, power, sewer, stormwater, and broadband connectivity. And then Suquamish citizens can build their own homes on these lots. I spoke with Scott Crowell, the Suquamish Community Development Director. He said that the relief funding helped speed up their ability to implement big plans like the Snooker neighborhood. But there's still, at least 80 households still on a wait list for housing at Tribal Housing Authority.
Are there other tribes in the region doing anything similar that you've come across?
One nation that I wrote about recently, the Samish Indian Nation, is building their very first housing project in Anacortes, what's now Anacortes. And, there's a lot of federally recognized nations across the state that have received funding, so I'm sure we'll see more innovative native housing developments.
You spoke with some representatives from federal agencies and nonprofit housing organizations for this reporting. And What did some of these people you spoke with who work on these issues say that we need to help with housing security for Native communities?
Well, I think across the board, everybody I talked to agreed that increased funding is necessary. When I spoke with Tony Walters, the National American Indian Housing Council's executive director, he said that he believes that at some point there needs to be a reckoning, and the federal government needs to honor the treaties, and that's why groups like them have to keep the pressure on. But there's still a long way to go. I spoke with Sara Sadian. She's the Senior Vice President of Public Policy and Field Organizing at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition. And a big part of holding these federal agencies to account, according to her and folks that she works with, is that we need accurate data for each individual nation, and it's imperative that we get that on the most remote and impoverished nations across the country. It could help us better understand those needs and the funds needed to make sure that they're met so that, Indigenous people are given the same opportunities as non-Native communities. And really, it comes down to people understanding that Native people are still here and that this isn't a charity, that these are treaty obligations. And the folks that I spoke to all believed that that's really imperative to progress at any level.
Thanks for listening to Crosscut Reports. This episode was reported by Luna Reyna and produced by me, Sara Bernard. Our story editor and executive producer is Mark Baumgarten. You can subscribe to Crosscut Reports wherever you listen, and whatever platform you're listening on, please review us. We'd love to know what you think of the show. Also, if you'd like to support the work we do at Crosscut, whether it's our lineup of podcasts, the live events we host every month, or the in-depth reporting we deliver every day, go to crosscut.com/membership. In addition to supporting our journalism, members receive complete access to the on-demand programming of Seattle's PBS station, KCTS 9. For the latest political, environmental, and culture news from the Pacific Northwest, visit crosscut.com. That's also where you'll find a text version of the story we discussed today. Crosscut Reports is a product of Cascade Public Media. I'm Sara Bernard. We'll be back soon with another episode.